A chilling wind swept through the deserted street, slipping between the peeling walls of houses and tearing the last leaves from bare branches. In a narrow alley where a streetlight blinked with a dim yellow light, sat a cardboard box, battered and frayed at the edges as if gnawed by dogs. Inside, on a piece of an old rag, lay a puppy. He was small and white, with fur as soft as fresh snow, but already matted with dirt. His tiny body shivered, and his large, round, dark honey-colored eyes stared into the void, as if trying to find an answer to why he was there. Abandoned and all alone. The puppy whined, but the sound was so weak that it was drowned out even by the rustle of the wind. He didn't know how much time had passed since the warm hands he loved had left him there. Hours? Days? In his tiny world, time stood still, turning into an endless cold. The box, his only shelter, let in the icy air, and every gust of wind bit into his skin like sharp teeth. He pressed himself against the rag, trying to bury his nose in his paws, but the warmth slipped away like water through his fingers. The street was empty. The rumble of cars could be heard far away, but no one ever looked into this forgotten corner of the city. The puppy didn't know what a city was, didn't know what loneliness was, but he felt it with his whole little soul. He remembered the scent of a person, a mix of tobacco and sweet cologne. He remembered being petted, and he remembered the laughter when he clumsily ran through the grass. But now that scent was gone, dissolved in the cold air, and with it, everything he knew about warmth and safety disappeared. His eyes, still full of a childlike trust, gazed at the edge of the box, where a piece of the sky was visible. It was gray and heavy like a coffin lid. He whimpered again, quietly, almost silently, as if afraid he would be heard and punished for this weak protest against being forgotten. His paws, thin as twigs, trembled, and his breath escaped in little clouds of vapor that immediately dissolved in the frosty air. He didn't understand why he was left alone, but somewhere deep in his heart, a tiny spark was flickering. A hope that someone would come, that this was a mistake, that he hadn't been forgotten. The box creaked as the wind pushed it, and the puppy instinctively curled up even tighter, as if trying to become smaller, less noticeable. He didn't know what to do, didn't know how to survive. All he had was the faint beat of his heart, which stubbornly continued to pound despite the cold and the loneliness. He closed his eyes, burying his nose in the rag, and imagined he was lying on a soft rug next to those warm hands again. But reality returned with a new gust of wind, and the puppy shivered once more. His whimper was lost in the night, unheard by anyone. In the distance, around the corner of the alley, heavy, fast footsteps could be heard. They approached but then faded, moving in the other direction. The puppy lifted his head. His ears perked, but no one appeared. He lay back down on the rag. His eyes shone in the darkness, like two small flashlights full of longing. The street was silent, and only the wind sang its lullaby, cold and merciless, carrying the last crumbs of warmth from the cardboard shelter. The puppy didn't know what awaited him. He didn't know what tomorrow was. But in his little heart, despite the pain and fear, hope still flickered, weak, almost intangible, but alive. He closed his eyes, trying to find shelter from the frost in his memories, and whimpered softly, almost soundlessly. His voice, so weak, was drowned out by the noise of the wind, but somewhere deep in his soul, a spark burned that refused to go out. He waited. He waited without knowing for what, but he waited. He waited with the stubborn belief that lives only in the hearts of those who have not yet forgotten how to hope. The frosty night thickened over the alley, and the streetlight blinking above the box finally went out, leaving the puppy in almost complete darkness. Only a faint reflection from distant streetlights fell on the cardboard walls, casting trembling shadows. The white puppy, curled into a ball, pressed against the old rag as if it could protect him from the cold, from the emptiness, from the loneliness that, like the wind, penetrated every corner of his small world. His faint whimper, barely audible, dissolved into the air, reaching no one's ears. The street was silent, indifferent to his quiet pleas. People passed by, hurried shadows wrapped in warm coats and scarves covering their faces. Their steps echoed on the pavement, but no one slowed down. No one turned their head toward the forgotten alley. A man in a long gray coat, clutching his phone, muttered something about traffic jams and quickened his pace. His heels clicked past the box, not even sparing a glance. A woman with a bag full of groceries walked so close that the puppy could smell fresh bread. But she just adjusted her hood and disappeared around the corner. For them, the box was just trash, one of many scattered around the city, and the puppy inside it was invisible, his existence not worth their attention. He lifted his head. His large eyes shone in the darkness, catching every flicker of light. The rustle of tires, the creak of a door somewhere in the distance, muffled laughter from a house across the street. Each sound made his heart beat faster. What if someone was coming for him? What if those same warm hands were returning to take him home? But hope faded with each new sound that dissolved into the night without bringing salvation. The puppy buried his nose in the rag again. His breathing became ragged, and his paws trembled from the cold and fatigue. Memories flashed through his mind like fragments of an old film reel. He saw a big yard full of grass where he chased a butterfly, heard the ringing laughter of a child who threw him a ball. He remembered the warmth of the carpet, the smell of fried chicken coming from the kitchen, and the voice of a woman soft as silk, calling to him, "Come here, sweetie." But those memories were distant, as if from another life. Now there was only the cold, only the cardboard, only the loneliness that squeezed his heart like an icy hand. The puppy whimpered again, but his voice was getting weaker. He didn't know how much longer he could last. His small body, covered in dirty white fur, trembled so hard that the rag beneath him rustled. He tried to lick his paw to warm himself, but his tongue stuck to the cold skin. Hunger gnawed at him from the inside, and thirst dried his throat, but the worst of all was the emptiness. Not in his stomach but in his soul. He felt abandoned not only by people but by a world that seemed to have forgotten his existence. A new sound could be heard nearby. Light, almost weightless steps, as if someone was sneaking. The puppy perked up. His ears went up and his eyes widened. It was a kid, a boy about 10 years old in a bright red jacket. He stopped a few steps from the box, holding a bag of chips. The puppy froze. His heart pounded, but the boy only glanced at the alley, snorted, and ran on, leaving behind the crunch of a wrapper that fell onto the pavement. The puppy watched him until the figure disappeared around the corner. And then his head drooped again. He didn't know what disappointment was, but he felt something inside him clench even tighter. The wind brought a new smell, dampness mixed with the smoke of a distant bonfire. The puppy inhaled, hoping to catch a hint of something familiar, but there was nothing. He closed his eyes, trying to hide in his memories, but even they began to fade, dissolving in the cold. His whimper became quieter, almost imperceptible, like a whisper. He didn't know how much longer he could wait, but his little heart continued to beat, clinging to that tiny spark that still flickered inside. He didn't know the words, but if he could, he would have whispered, "Please find me." The street continued its life, indifferent to his quiet plea. Cars rushed by. Their headlights briefly illuminated the alley, but the light didn't linger. People walked on without looking back. Their voices merged into a distant hum, and their footsteps dissolved into the night. The puppy was left alone in his box, in his small world where there was nothing but cold and silence. But somewhere deep in his soul, beneath a layer of fear and pain, hope still burned, weak but stubborn like a star pushing through the clouds. He waited, not knowing if someone would come, but believing that the moment would arrive. The frost intensified, and the alley turned into an icy trap where every breath the puppy took burned his lungs like swallowed shards of glass. The white ball of fur, barely visible in the darkness, curled into a tight knot, pressing against the damp rag at the bottom of the box. His paws, thin and fragile, trembled like leaves in the wind, and his tail, usually fluffy, was stuck to his body, covered in a crust of dirt. The cold penetrated everywhere. Into his fur, into his skin, into his bones, as if it wanted to freeze his very heart. The puppy breathed shallowly in gasps, and each exhale came out as a cloud of vapor that immediately dissolved in the night air. The street fell silent. Even the wind seemed to have grown tired of howling and now only occasionally touched the cardboard walls, making them rustle like old newspapers. The puppy tried to hide his nose under his paw, but the cold was stronger. It gnawed at his body, shackling his movements and stealing his strength. His eyes, large and shining like dark lakes, stared into the void, but they no longer held the curiosity they once had. Now there was only fatigue, mixed with a tiny, almost extinguished hope. He didn't know how much longer he could hold on, but his little heart continued to beat, slowly, stubbornly, as if ticking out the rhythm of a life he wasn't yet ready to let go of. The memories that once brought comfort now seemed distant, almost foreign. He tried to remember the warmth of hands, the smell of food, the sound of laughter, but the cold pushed everything out, leaving only a gray emptiness. The puppy whimpered, but his voice was so weak that even he could barely hear it. He pressed himself against the rag even harder, as if it could become a blanket, shielding him from the frost, the loneliness, the fear. But the rag was cold and damp, and its smell, a mix of mustiness and rotting leftovers, only intensified his longing. Somewhere in the distance a new sound could be heard. The crunch of tires, the slam of a car door. The puppy lifted his head. His ears perked up, catching the sound. For a moment, his heart beat faster, but the sound died as quickly as it had appeared. It was just another car driving past, not noticing his small world. He lowered his head, his eyes closed, and he curled back into a ball, trying to save the last crumbs of warmth. His fur, once white as fresh snow, was now gray with dirt, and only in the faint moonlight could its former beauty be seen. The cold became unbearable. The puppy felt his paws grow numb, his body heavy, as if someone had covered him with an invisible stone. He tried to move to get his blood flowing, but his strength was leaving him. His breathing became even shallower, and his whimper turned into a barely audible whisper. He didn't know what death was, but he felt something dark and heavy hanging over him, like a shadow ready to swallow him whole. And yet, somewhere deep in his little soul, a spark continued to burn. Weak, trembling, but alive. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a new sound. Heavy, confident footsteps, as if someone was walking with a clear purpose. The puppy opened his eyes. His ears perked up, but his body refused to move. The steps were getting closer, growing louder, and for a moment, the beam of a flashlight illuminated the alley, gliding over the box. The puppy froze, his heart pounding, but the beam of light disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. The steps died down and silence returned. He closed his eyes again, feeling the cold clench him tighter and tighter, as if it wanted to squeeze the last of his strength out of him. He remembered how once in that other life he lay by a fireplace, feeling the warmth that enveloped him like a soft blanket. He was happy then, not knowing that happiness could be so fragile. Now, in this box, in this cold, he could only dream of that warmth, of those hands that petted him, of the voice that called him by name. But he no longer had a name. He was just a puppy, abandoned in a box, forgotten by everyone but the wind and the frost. And yet, despite everything, he didn't give up. His small heart continued to beat. His eyes, though dulled, still searched for light. He whimpered softly, almost silently, and this sound was his only protest against oblivion. He didn't know how much longer he could endure, but somewhere deep in his soul lived a belief, an inexplicable childlike belief, that someone would come, that this cold wasn't forever. He waited, curled up in a ball in his little box under the indifferent gaze of the stars that looked down on him from afar, not warming him, but reminding him that he was still alive. The frosty air thickened, turning the alley into an icy trap, where the puppy's breath could barely break through the constricting cold. The white ball of fur, pressed against the damp rag, trembled. His paws twitched in time with his weak heartbeat, and his eyes, dulled with fatigue, stared at the edge of the box where the darkness merged with the gray pavement. The wind died down, leaving a silence broken only by the rare rustle of trash. But in this emptiness, the puppy felt his strength draining away, like water through cracks in the cardboard. He didn't whimper anymore. His voice had frozen in his throat. He just blinked, trying to clear the haze from his eyes. Suddenly, a distant roar of a car engine was heard, low and steady, building like an approaching storm. The puppy lifted his ear, and his body tensed despite its numbness. The sound grew louder. Tires crunched on the pavement, and the light of headlights slid across the alley walls, illuminating the box for a moment like a flash of lightning. The car slowed. The engine purred more softly, and the puppy froze. His breathing quickened, the vapor hanging in the air. The wheels stopped with a quiet squeak, and silence returned, but it was different now. Tense and full of anticipation. A door slammed, echoing off the walls. Steps, heavy and confident, rang out on the pavement, approaching slowly, as if the person was hesitating. The puppy didn't move. His eyes widened, catching the shadow that fell on the edge of the box. The figure stopped. The person's breath came out in a cloud, mingling with the frosty air. Hands and gloves lowered to their knees, and a face, indistinct in the twilight with wrinkles around its eyes, leaned closer. The puppy blinked, feeling the warmth of another's breath. A weak but real hint of life outside the cold. The person sighed. Their gaze slid over the white fur, matted with dirt, over the trembling paws, and something in their eyes shifted. A hint of pity mixed with a memory. He reached out a hand but paused without touching, as if afraid to startle this fragile creature. The puppy didn't back away. He just lifted his head a little higher. His nose reached for the glove, catching a new scent, a mix of coffee and wet wool. The wind stirred again, but now it seemed warmer, as if the air itself sensed a change. The car stood nearby. Its headlights glowed softly, casting a golden light on the pavement where puddles of ice glistened like stars. The man straightened up, looking around. His breathing quickened as if he were deciding what to do next. The puppy looked up at him. His tail twitched for the first time in hours. A weak, barely noticeable gesture full of quiet pleading. Silence hung in the air, broken only by the rumble of the engine, and in this pause a spark was born, fragile but bright, like the first ray of dawn on the horizon. The man leaned down again. His gloved hand touched the edge of the box, and the cardboard creaked under his fingers. The puppy didn't pull away. His eyes shone, reflecting the light of the headlights. The smell of gasoline and wet asphalt hung in the air, but beneath it, there was a warmth, invisible but palpable. The footsteps stopped, and the person whispered something inaudible. His voice echoed in the alley. The puppy blinked, feeling the cold retreat for a moment, giving way to something new and unknown. The figure straightened but didn't leave. He stood looking down, and his shadow covered the box like a protective shield. The puppy got to his feet. The trembling in his body subsided, replaced by a light quiver. The car waited, its door left ajar, and a faint sound of the radio came from inside. A soft and calming melody. The man nodded to himself. His shoulders relaxed, and he stepped closer, ready for the next move. In that moment, the alley seemed less gloomy, and the night not so endless. The puppy didn't know what was ahead, but his heart beat more steadily, as if it sensed the change in the air. The man crouched down. His eyes met the puppy's, and in that gaze a warm spark flickered. It promised an end to the loneliness. The wind died down. The car's headlights illuminated both of them, and in that light hope came alive, quiet but unquenchable. The frosty alley, bound by silence, seemed frozen in time, but the light of the car's headlights cut through the darkness like a knife, illuminating the cardboard box where the white puppy trembled, pressed against the damp rag. His large eyes, dulled by the cold, now gleamed, reflecting the golden light, and his ears, slightly bent, perked up, catching every sound. The man standing over the box leaned in closer. His breath came out in warm clouds that momentarily warmed the air around the puppy. The man's shadow covered the cardboard like a shield, protecting it from the wind. And in that gesture there was something inexplicably warm, almost familiar. He took off a glove, revealing a hand callous from work but soft in its movement. His gaze, tired but full of quiet determination, slid over the puppy, from his matted fur to his trembling paws. "Poor thing," he muttered. His voice, hoarse from the cold, was barely audible, but it held a sincere pity. The puppy blinked. His nose reached for the hand, catching the scent. Coffee, the leather of a jacket, something distant like a memory of home. He didn't pull away, even though instinct told him to be afraid. Something about this man in his slow movements inspired trust. The man cautiously reached out his hand, and his fingers hovered an inch from the puppy, as if he was afraid he would disappear like a mirage. The puppy watched him. His heart beat faster, but not from fear. It was from a premonition. The hand touched his fur. A light, almost weightless touch, but it was the first warmth the puppy had felt in many hours. He flinched, but not from the cold, from a strange feeling that spread through his body like a ray of sunlight. The man smiled. The corners of his lips twitched, and in that movement, there was something the puppy couldn't understand but felt was safety. "How'd you end up here?" the man asked. His voice became softer, as if he were talking not only to the puppy but to himself. He looked at the box, noticed its torn edges and the dirty rag, and his brows furrowed. The puppy seemed to answer with a quiet squeak. His voice was weak, but it no longer held that desperate longing. The man shook his head. His fingers gently stroked the puppy's head, and the puppy closed his eyes for the first time that night, allowing himself to relax. The warmth of the hand was so foreign, so forgotten, but it awakened memories of those days when he was petted, when he wasn't alone. The car still rumbled nearby. Its headlights cast a soft light on the asphalt, where puddles of ice glistened like shattered mirrors. The man straightened up. His gaze slid over the alley as if he were looking for someone who could have left the puppy there. But the street was empty. Only the wind rustled the trash, and the distant bark of a dog broke the silence. He looked at the puppy again, and a shadow of a memory flickered in his eyes, something personal, deeply hidden. "This is not right," he muttered. "To abandon a creature like this." His voice trembled, but not from the cold, but from something the puppy couldn't understand. The man leaned in closer. His hands cautiously slid under the puppy's body, lifting him from the box. The puppy whimpered. His paws twitched, but he didn't resist. The cardboard was left behind, and the warmth of the hands, rough but gentle, enveloped him like a blanket. He felt the cold retreat. His body stopped trembling, although his paws were still numb. The man pressed him to his chest. His jacket smelled of wet wool and smoke, but beneath that scent, there was something alive, human, promising salvation. The man's footsteps echoed on the pavement, carrying the puppy away from the alley. The car waited, its door open, and a faint scent of leather and gasoline came from the interior. The puppy blinked. His eyes still shone, but now they held more life, more light. The man stopped at the car, looked at the puppy, and his face softened. "Let's go, sweetie," he said. His voice was warm like a ray of sunlight. "You've been cold long enough." The puppy didn't know where he was being taken, but he felt that this man was his hope and his salvation. The alley was left behind. Its dark walls dissolved into the night, and the white puppy, still trembling, pressed against the chest of the man whose hands, rough but warm, carried him away from the cold and oblivion. The man's jacket, smelling of smoke and leather, was the first shelter the puppy had felt in hours. And he buried his nose in it, inhaling a scent that was foreign but alive. His little heart beat faster, as if trying to catch up with the rhythm of the footsteps that echoed on the pavement. The car waited nearby. Its headlights cast a soft light on the wet asphalt, and a faint whisper of the radio came from the ajar door, a melody like a lullaby. The man carefully held the puppy close. His fingers, calloused from work, gently stroked the matted fur, as if he was afraid this fragile creature would melt in his hands. "You're frozen solid, sweetie," he muttered. His voice, hoarse but warm, trembled with something the puppy couldn't understand, whether it was pity or memories. The puppy blinked. His large eyes, the color of dark honey, looked up at the man, and for the first time that night, a spark appeared in them. Not fear, not longing, but something new, timid yet alive. He opened the car door, and the warm air from the interior touched the puppy like a soft blanket. The smell of gasoline and leather mixed with something sweet, maybe a piece of candy forgotten on the seat. The man carefully lowered himself into the driver's seat, not letting go of the puppy, and pressed him to his chest like a child. The puppy felt the warmth of his body, so foreign but so welcome, and his paws, still numb, began to thaw. He didn't move, afraid to scare this moment away. This first hint of salvation. His breathing became steadier, and the trembling that had gripped his body subsided, giving way to a warmth that spread through his veins like sunlight. The man looked at the puppy. His eyes, tired with wrinkles at the corners, softened. He took off his other glove, tossing it on the passenger seat, and gently ran his fingers over the puppy's head, smoothing the dirty fur. "Who could have left you like this?" he asked softly, as if not expecting an answer. As if in response, the puppy licked his hand. It was a weak, barely noticeable movement, but it held all of his gratitude. The man smiled, and in that smile, there was something the puppy felt but didn't understand. A mixture of pain and hope, as if he himself had once been lost. The car hummed, the engine came to life, and the interior filled with the soft warmth from the heater. The puppy snuggled closer, his nose buried into the jacket sleeve, and he inhaled deeply, catching the person's scent, coffee, tobacco, something distant like a memory of home. He closed his eyes for a moment and remembered another home. A warm carpet, ringing laughter, and hands that petted him. But these memories no longer tore at his heart as they once did. The warmth, real and alive, was here in these hands, in this car, in this moment. The man carefully moved the puppy to the passenger seat, where an old woolen sweater lay. He wrapped the puppy in it like a blanket. The puppy felt the fabric wrap around him, holding warmth. The sweater smelled of dust and something homey, cozy, and he buried his nose in it, as if trying to hide from everything left behind in that cold alley. The man turned up the radio slightly, and the melody became clearer, soft, with smooth notes that soothed like a lullaby. The puppy blinked, his eyes still shining, but now they held more life, more light. The car moved, and the headlights slid along the walls of the alley, leaving the box behind. The puppy watched the man. His ears twitched, catching the rhythm of the engine, the rustle of the tires, the man's breath. He didn't know where they were going, but it no longer mattered. The cold was gone, and for the first time in hours, the puppy felt that he was not alone. His small body relaxed, his paws stopped trembling, and his heart beat more steadily, as if it knew that this man was his salvation, his new chance. The man glanced at the puppy. His hand briefly touched the sweater, checking if he was comfortable. "Get some sleep, little one," he said. His voice was soft like the moonlight. "Everything will be all right now." The puppy didn't understand the words, but he felt their warmth, their promise. He closed his eyes, nestled into the sweater, and for the first time that night, allowed himself to believe that the cold wasn't forever, that loneliness wasn't his destiny. The car drove forward, carrying him away from oblivion, towards something new, something that smelled of hope. The car swayed gently on the road. Its headlights picked out pieces of asphalt covered with a thin layer of ice from the darkness, and the warm air from the heater filled the interior with a coziness the white puppy hadn't known for an eternity. He lay on the passenger seat, wrapped in the old woolen sweater whose scent, a mixture of dust and something homey, enveloped him like a memory of long-forgotten affection. His small body, still weak from the cold, no longer trembled, and his paws, which had seemed frozen forever just a short while ago, began to twitch softly as if awakening to life. The puppy blinked. His large, dark honey-colored eyes shone in the dim light of the interior, reflecting the faint glow of the dashboard. The man at the wheel was silent, his hands gripping the steering wheel, but his gaze occasionally darted to the puppy, as if checking if he was okay. His face, with deep wrinkles around his eyes, was tired, but a hint of a smile, shy and almost imperceptible, was hidden at the corners of his lips, as if he was afraid of scaring away this moment. The puppy looked up at him. His nose twitched, catching the scent of coffee and leather that now seemed familiar, almost native. For the first time in hours he didn't feel fear, only a quiet curiosity mixed with something new. Something he didn't yet have a name for. The car turned onto a narrow street where old, battered houses were crowded together, and the streetlights cast a soft light on the sidewalks. The puppy lifted his head. His ears twitched, catching the sounds. A distant dog's bark, the creak of a gate, the rustle of tires on the wet asphalt. He didn't know where they were going, but it no longer scared him. The warmth of the sweater, the rhythm of the engine, the gentle voice of the radio, all of it merged into one, creating the feeling that the world that had rejected him was now opening its doors again. The man glanced at the puppy, and their eyes met. It was the first real gaze, not a fleeting or accidental one, but a deep one. It was as if two worlds, separated by a chasm, had suddenly found a point of connection. A shadow of pain flickered in the man's eyes, mixed with warmth, as if he saw something long lost in the puppy. The puppy, not looking away, quietly squeaked, not out of fear, but from the desire to respond, to say something in his own language. His tail, still weak, twitched, touching the sweater. And this small gesture was like a bridge that connected them. "You're a brave one," the man said. His voice was low but soft, like a whisper of the wind on a warm day. He reached out his hand, gently touching the puppy's head. And the puppy didn't flinch but leaned in closer, feeling the warmth of his fingers. This touch was different. It wasn't just salvation but something more. It was as if the man and the puppy had made a silent agreement. The puppy licked his hand. His tongue, still dry from thirst, left a faint trail. The man smiled wider, and at that moment, the light from a streetlight illuminated his face, showing the wrinkles that spoke of years of loss, but also of a hope that still lived in his heart. The car slowed down, approaching a small house with peeling paint on the walls and a crooked fence. The puppy felt the rhythm of the engine change, and his ears perked up. He didn't know what awaited him, but the man's gaze, warm and confident, told him that everything would be all right. The puppy sat up. His paws were still weak, but he wanted to see, wanted to understand. The car window reflected his snout, dirty but still white, with eyes that now held a glimmer of life. The man turned off the engine, and silence settled over the interior, broken only by the faint ticking of the cooling motor. He looked at the puppy. His hand paused on the door handle, as if he was considering whether he was ready for the next step. "Come on, little one," he said. His voice was soft, but it held a sense of resolve. "Let's see what I can do for you." The puppy blinked. His nose reached for the hand, and he licked it again, as if confirming that he trusted him, that he was ready to follow this man wherever he led. The car door opened, and the cold air rushed into the interior. But it was no longer as harsh as in the alley. The man carefully lifted the puppy, holding him close to his chest, and the sweater remained on the seat. Holding the warmth of their first contact, the puppy buried his nose in the jacket, feeling the man's heart beat steadily and confidently. He didn't know what awaited him behind the door of this house, but in this gaze, in this warmth, in this moment, he felt that loneliness had been left behind. His eyes shone, and for the first time that night he wasn't crying. He was looking forward to a new beginning. The car was left behind. Its headlights went out, and the night enveloped the street, where the old house with peeling paint and a crooked fence stood like a silent guardian, holding its secrets. The man walked to the porch, holding the white puppy close to his chest. His steps were firm but cautious, as if he were carrying something fragile that could break with one wrong move. The puppy, still weak, buried his nose in the jacket, inhaling the scent of coffee and leather, which now was associated with warmth, with safety. His large, dark, honey-colored eyes shone in the dim light of the streetlight, and his ears, slightly bent, caught new sounds. The creak of the gate, the rustle of the wind in the bare branches, the distant hum of the city. The man stopped at the door, and his hand paused on the handle, as if he were gathering his thoughts. The puppy felt his heartbeat quicken, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. The door creaked open, and the warm air from the house poured out, carrying with it the smells of old wood, boiling potatoes, and a faint hint of lavender. The puppy blinked. His nose twitched, catching these new scents so foreign yet so enticing. He lifted his head, trying to see what awaited him, and his paws, still weak, moved as if he wanted to step into this new world. Inside, the house was modest but cozy. The worn wooden floorboards creaked under the man's feet, and the light from an old lamp hanging over the table cast soft shadows on the walls covered with faded wallpaper. An old blanket lay on the sofa, carelessly folded, and a lonely mug with unfinished tea stood on the table, from which a light steam still rose. The man closed the door behind him, cutting off the cold night, and the puppy felt the warmth of the house enveloping him like a soft cocoon. He no longer trembled. His body relaxed, and his eyes shone brighter, reflecting the light of the lamp. The man knelt down, gently lowering the puppy to the floor but not letting go of him completely. His hand still supported the small body, as if he was afraid he couldn't stand on his paws. "You're home now, little one," he said. His voice was low, but it held a warmth, as if he were talking not only to the puppy but to himself, convincing himself that he had made the right choice. The puppy looked up at him. His tail twitched. For the first time in a long time, it moved not from the cold but from timid joy. He licked the man's hand, leaving a wet mark on the calloused skin, and the man smiled. His wrinkles softened as if years of loneliness had retreated for a moment. The puppy took a hesitant step. His paws slid on the smooth floor, but he didn't fall. The warmth of the house gave him strength. He looked around. His nose reached for the smell of food coming from the kitchen, where a pot was quietly bubbling on the stove. The room was small, but it had something alive, something real. Old photographs on the shelf, a well-worn book lying open on the armchair, the faint crackle of wood in the fireplace that was just starting to blaze. The puppy blinked, his eyes stopping on the fire, and he remembered another fireplace, another home where he had once been happy. But now this memory didn't tear at his heart. It was just a shadow, and the real thing was here in this warmth, in this man's gaze. The man stood up, took off his jacket, and hung it on a hook by the door. He looked at the puppy, who was stepping uncertainly on the floor, and his brows furrowed slightly, as if he was thinking about what to do next. "I need to feed you," he muttered. His voice was soft, but it held a sense of resolve. He walked into the kitchen, and the puppy, guided by instinct, followed him. His paws patted softly on the worn floor. The kitchen was cramped, with a well-used table and an old refrigerator that hummed like a tired animal. The man opened the door, took out a bowl with the remains of soup, and placed it on the floor next to a bowl of water. The puppy froze. His nose twitched, catching the scent of the food. He looked at the man as if asking for permission, and the man nodded. His eyes softened. "Eat, little one," he said, and the puppy, hesitant but greedy, crawled to the bowl. His tongue touched the water, cold but clean, and he drank, feeling his thirst subside. Then he tasted the soup, and the warmth of the food spread through his body, filling him with a strength he hadn't known for a long time. The man watched him, leaning against the table, and in his gaze was a mixture of relief and something else. Maybe a memory of someone who had once been there. The puppy lifted his head. His snout was wet with soup, and his eyes shone brighter than ever. He looked at the man, and their gazes met again. A warm, silent exchange full of a promise. The puppy was no longer alone. This house, this man, this moment became his new beginning. He didn't know what was ahead, but he felt that here, in this warmth, in this gaze, he had found a place where he wouldn't be abandoned. His tail twitched again, and he quietly squeaked as if saying, "I'm here, I'm with you." The warm light of the lamp filled the small kitchen, reflecting off the worn wooden table, where a bowl with the remains of soup, now almost empty, stood. The white puppy, still weak but no longer trembling, sat on the floor. His snout was wet with food, and his large, dark, honey-colored eyes shone brighter than ever. He licked his lips, catching the last drops of broth, and his tail, still covered in a crust of dirt, twitched as if tasting a new life. The smells of boiled potatoes and lavender mixed with the warmth of the fireplace, which crackled in the next room, filling the house with a coziness the puppy hadn't known since his world had collapsed in the cold alley. The man stood, leaning against the countertop. His gaze followed every move the puppy made, and in his eyes was something soft, almost paternal. His hands, callous from work, still smelled of coffee and leather. But now a faint scent of soap was mixed in, from the soap he had used to wash the bowl before pouring water into it. "Well, little one, are you full?" he asked. His voice was low but warm, like the crackle of wood in the fireplace. The puppy looked up at him. His ears moved as if he were trying to understand the words, and he quietly squeaked as if answering, "Yes, thank you." The man smiled. His wrinkles softened and he knelt down, reaching out a hand. The puppy didn't flinch but leaned closer. His nose touched the fingers and he licked them, leaving a wet trail. It wasn't just gratitude. It was a gesture of trust, small but sincere. The man shook his head. His gaze became thoughtful, as if he were remembering something distant. "I need to get you cleaned up," he muttered, and his voice held a resolve mixed with a slight uncertainty, as if he wasn't sure he was ready to take on this care. He stood up and walked to the corner of the kitchen, where an old sink covered in rust stains stood. The puppy, led by curiosity, hesitantly followed him. His paws patted softly on the worn floor. The man turned on the water, checking its temperature with his fingers, and took an old towel from under the sink, which smelled of soap and dust. He filled a bowl with warm water, added a drop of liquid soap, and bubbles light as clouds rose to the surface. The puppy stopped. His nose twitched, catching the new scent, and he looked at the man as if asking what was next. The man returned to the puppy, knelt down and carefully lifted him, pressing him to his chest so he wouldn't be afraid. "Don't be scared, little one," he said. His voice was soft like the moonlight. "I'm just going to get this dirt off you." He dipped the towel in the warm water and began to gently wipe the puppy's fur, starting with his face. The puppy flinched at the first touch, but the warmth of the water and the softness of the fabric calmed him. The dirt that had covered his white fur began to wash away, revealing its natural purity, like snow that had just fallen to the ground. The man worked slowly. His hands moved with caution, as if he was afraid of hurting him. He wiped his paws, his ears, his tail, and with each movement, the puppy felt the cold and pain of the alley move further and further away, dissolving in the warmth of this home. His eyes followed the man, and there was no fear in them, only a gratitude that needed no words. The man smiled, noticing how the puppy's fur began to shine. "That's much better," he said, and his voice held a pride, as if he wasn't just cleaning the puppy, but bringing him back to life. When the fur became almost white, the man wrapped the puppy in a dry towel, soft but slightly faded, and carried him to the fireplace in the living room. The fire crackled, casting warm reflections on the walls, and the puppy felt the heat of the flames enveloping him, as if the house itself was hugging him. The man sat on the floor next to him, placing the puppy on the old blanket, and began to gently comb his fur with his fingers, removing the last clumps of dirt. The puppy closed his eyes. His breathing became steady, and his heart beat calmly, as if it knew that here in this house, he was safe. The man looked at the puppy, and his gaze became thoughtful. He reached out to a shelf where an old photograph in a cracked frame stood. It showed a woman with a smile, holding a puppy as white as this one. His fingers paused, and for a moment, a shadow of pain flickered in his eyes, but he quickly looked away, as if he didn't want to go back to the past. "You're staying here," he said, quietly addressing the puppy. "No one will ever abandon you again." The puppy, not understanding the words, felt their warmth and licked the man's hand as if agreeing. The fireplace crackled, filling the room with coziness, and the puppy, now clean and warm, curled up on the blanket. His eyes shone, reflecting the fire. He was no longer alone, no longer abandoned. This house, this man, this warmth became his new world, where care wasn't just a gesture but a promise. His tail twitched, and he quietly squeaked as if saying, "I'm home." The fireplace crackled, casting warm reflections on the worn walls of the small living room, where the white puppy, now clean and fluffy, curled up on the old blanket like in a nest. His fur, freed from the dirt, shone like fresh snow in the moonlight, and his large, dark, honey-colored eyes gleamed, reflecting the flames. He was no longer trembling. His breathing was steady, and his heart beat calmly, in sync with the quiet rhythm of the house. The smells of boiled potatoes, lavender, and faint smoke from the fireplace merged into a cozy aroma that enveloped the puppy like a warm embrace. He lay, burying his nose in the blanket, and for the first time in days, he felt no fear, hunger or cold, only a peace that seemed like a miracle to him. The man sat on the floor next to him, leaning against the sofa. His hands, calloused from work, rested on his knees. He looked at the puppy, and in his eyes, tired with wrinkles at the corners, there was something new. Not just pity or duty, but a genuine warmth. It was as if this little ball of fur had filled a void he had long forgotten about. "You're my little one now," he said softly. His voice was gentle, like the crackle of wood in the fireplace, but it held a sense of resolve, as if he had made a promise not only to the puppy but to himself. The puppy lifted his head, his ears moved, and he licked the air as if trying to respond. The house lived its own life. The old refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. The clock on the wall ticked, marking time that was no longer frightening. The puppy stood up. His paws, still weak but now steady, took a few steps on the worn floor. He sniffed the corner of the sofa, which smelled of dust and something sweet, maybe cookie crumbs that had fallen there once. His tail, now fluffy, wagged, and he quietly squeaked, as if trying out a voice that had been suppressed by cold and loneliness for so long. The man smiled. His hand reached for the puppy, and he, without hesitation, pressed against it, feeling the warmth of his fingers. The man stood up, walked to the shelf, and took out an old dusty tin box. He opened it, and something clinked inside. A metal collar, worn but still strong, with a small tag on which the name Luna was engraved. His fingers paused, and for a moment, his gaze clouded over as if he had gone back to the past, where another dog, just as white, ran around the yard, and a woman's laughter filled the house. He shook his head, pushing the memories away, and looked at the puppy. "You need a name," he said. His voice trembled, but it held resolve. The puppy blinked. His eyes met the man's, and in that gaze, there was a silence full of trust. The man knelt down, holding out the collar. "How about sunshine?" he asked, as if the puppy could answer. "You're like a ray of light. You came through all that." He carefully put the collar around the puppy's neck, and the puppy didn't resist. He just tilted his head as if agreeing. The metal was cold but quickly warmed from the heat of his body, and the puppy, now Sunshine, took a step forward. His paws stepped confidently on the floor. He was no longer nameless, abandoned in a box. He was home, he was someone's. Morning came unnoticed. Light broke through the curtains, filling the room with soft gold. The puppy woke up. His nose reached for the smell of coffee that the man was brewing in the kitchen. He jumped off the blanket, his paws no longer slipping, and ran to the man. His tail wagged happily like a small flag. The man turned around, saw him, and laughed. For the first time in a long time, judging by how his eyes lit up. "Well, you're a little speedster, Sunshine," he said, pouring water into the bowl. The puppy drank eagerly, and then he looked at the man. His eyes shone, full of life, full of joy. The day passed with simple things. The man fed the puppy, petted him, taught him to sit on the old rug, and threw him a ball he found in a drawer. The puppy ran and stumbled, but he got up every time. His bark, still weak but clear, filled the house with a sound that hadn't been there for a long time. The man watched him, and his face, usually stern, softened, as if the puppy had brought not only life but also a light that scattered the shadows of the past. He didn't say much, but every gesture, from how he tucked the blanket under the puppy to how he scratched him behind the ear, was full of care. By evening, the puppy, now Sunshine, curled up by the fireplace. His fur shone in the light of the fire, and his collar quietly jingled when he moved. He looked at the man, who was sitting in the armchair with a book, but he wasn't reading, he was just watching the puppy. His eyes were full of warmth. The puppy was no longer afraid. Not of the night, not of the cold, not of loneliness. He had found his home, his person, his life. His tail twitched, and he quietly squeaked, as if to say, "I'm happy."